Hi everyone. This is the lecture to accompany Chapter 12 in your textbook. Please carefully read Chapter 12. There's a lot of information in it that I don't have time to address in this lecture. Okay, let's talk about finding, evaluating, and using sources. For this class, you're required to write 2 papers, both of which will need good, solid, credible outside sources as evidence. This chapter, along with our library research workshop, will help you understand how to find sources, determine their credibility, and incorporate that information into your papers. But more than that, understanding what constitutes a good source and good information is critical in today's society. The idea that no sources can be trusted, that evidence is fluid, and that there is no objective truth are popular. But there are trustworthy sources. And there is objective truth. It's up to us to find it, however, because we are served a constant dose of half-truths and alternative facts, whatever those are, that are meant to confuse us. You need access to good evidence so you can evaluate the arguments of others, as well as formulate your own arguments that are sound and cogent. Finding and using the best information will serve you well, not just in this class, but in all aspects of your life. And as it says here, not all evidence is good evidence. So how do you find good evidence? One of the best things about our information age is that we have access to practically any piece of information we want at our fingertips anytime we want. In fact, there's so much information out there that it can seem overwhelming. Plus, a lot of it is of dubious quality. Research can be a daunting task, but there are ways to make it less cumbersome. One of the first and best things you can do is to refine your search. For your critical essay, for example, if you're critiquing an op-ed column about nuclear power, just typing nuclear power into a search engine will get you millions of results, which may or may not fit what you're doing. You don't have time to search through millions of potential sources. You should already have summarized or standardized the arguments in the op-ed article. Based on your summary, you should be able to write some research questions that more clearly identify exactly what aspects of nuclear power you need to research. Then you would use what the book refers to as directional materials to help you find the right information. So what is directional information? Well, there are lots of online bibliographies, which are lists of books or other publications. CSN's online card catalog is one of these. There are also indexes and databases, many of which are available through the CSN library, and our librarian will show you how to access those. And of course, internet search engines such as Google, Yahoo, Ask.com, Bing, and others. The book talks about online discussion groups that might be able to point you in the right direction, but frankly, I checked into those and they tend to be extremely biased or taken over by trolls. I don't recommend them for trying to find good sources, although you might have better luck than I did. Anyway, these directional resources can guide you to books, articles, and websites that contain information pertinent to your topic. But there are other resources out there that may be very good sources of information, including general background information, facts, statistics, and definitions pertinent to your topic. There are lots of good online encyclopedias, some of which our library subscribes to. The Gale Virtual Reference Library can be accessed through the CSN library and contains lots of great informational sources. Be careful of wikis, including Wikipedia. Not that they aren't decent sources of information, but they are editable. In other words, they can be changed by anyone with access. Although there are thousands of volunteers at Wikipedia whose job it is to check all entries carefully, some things can slip by them, and you might be guilty of inadvertently putting incorrect information in your paper. There are also lots of fact books like almanacs and yearbooks with excellent and trustworthy information. Biographical sources like Who's Who are great for finding information on people of interest, and there are lots of online dictionaries to help define terms. And despite what you might be feeling about the federal government, they are the largest collector of information on the planet, and you can find good, solid, and yes, trustworthy information on government websites. When we think of research, we have a tendency to think of going to the library and pulling books off the shelf, or sitting at our computer typing search terms into Google, but a big part of good research often involves talking to actual people. First and foremost, the librarian. They know where all the good information is, trust me. But other people, including faculty members, local experts on your topic, and government officials, can be great sources of information and can help guide you to other sources as well. Make sure, however, that before you contact these people, you know exactly what you want from them. Don't just assume you can wing it. You don't want to waste somebody's time. And first make sure the information you want from them isn't already available online. First-hand experiences and knowledge, opinions, and reflections, those are the kinds of things that only another human being can offer you. This textbook, good as it is, was obviously written before fake news, fake websites, and lack of faith in the media, government, and academia turned us into a post-truth society. Nevertheless, the ways in which we evaluate our sources of information remain the same. Is it more challenging to sift through sources to find those that can be considered reliable? Yes, but it's worth it to find trustworthy sources and the information they provide. In order to properly evaluate a source, you need to look at several things: the content, the author and publisher, and the intended audience. We will take each of these in turn. Look first at the content of the book, article, web page, interview, etc. You're going to be looking for the general thesis of the document. What is the author saying? Look for facts that you can verify or that are documented. Look also for things that are labeled as facts but are unverified or are actually the author's opinions. Don't simply assume that claims that look like facts are actually facts. Look at this quote by Sigmund Freud. The fact that women must be regarded as having little sense of justice is no doubt related to the predominance of envy in their mental life. No offense to Mr. Freud, but his claim that women have little sense of justice and a predominance of envy, that is speculation and assumption, not fact. Even when something appears to be well documented, it may lack context and thus be hard to determine if it actually reflects reality. Also, the author may have only included information and evidence that supports his or her thesis and left out other information that would not support it. This is called cherry picking, and you should be on guard against it. Also, be aware of an author's bias. Often you can tell by the language used in the article that the author has an agenda and is not attempting to be neutral. Biased language should make you suspicious of their claims, and you may need to do more research into their evidence or reject the article altogether. I'm not saying that bias is a sole reason to reject claims. Remember, we already determined that by itself, bias is not a good reason, but it should make you more skeptical. And finally, look at the publication date. The information contained in the book or article might be out of date or actually have been proven to be incorrect in subsequent articles. Anyone with a computer and an internet connection can be an author these days. Just because something is said, written, or published doesn't necessarily make it true. So you need to check the background of the author and or publisher to make sure they can be relied upon. So when you read or listen to someone, ask yourself, what is the author's background? Is this person considered an expert on the topic at hand? What are their credentials and education? Some well-known experts are immediately credible. Others you might need to look up in order to determine their credibility. If the author is a journalist, do they have a background in the area they're reporting on? Is this their regular beat, like crime reporting or political reporting? Do they regularly report on issues of social justice? And you need to look at all sides of an issue, so try to find good sources on the other side as well. Try to determine the author's bias and purpose for writing the piece. We all have biases, but some authors are more careful to remain neutral than others. Even if an author's bias is known, you may still be able to use their information as long as you understand the filter through which it's presented, check it for reliability, and present it to your audience with the caveat that bias may exist. The examples here of pamphlets published by pro- and anti-tobacco organizations would obviously be biased in favor of their own viewpoints, so any information you find in them should be double-checked for accuracy. You might need to find less biased sources depending on what you found. And look at the sources of information the author uses to support their claims. Have they found the best, most reliable sources? Or are their sources biased? Have they looked at both sides of the issue as well? The original source of the information that someone uses in an article is known as the primary source. Make sure that they've quoted their sources correctly, that the sources aren't biased. In addition, you need to look at the publisher or sponsor of the information. Remember, the Washington Post and the National Enquirer are both publications, but the Washington Post is a well-respected and trustworthy source, while the National Enquirer is not. Good publications have editorial staffs whose job is to make sure that what is published is very high quality. Yes, mistakes happen, but most information that appears in major newspapers is generally reliable, and the best ones keep their news sections and editorial sections, where opinion pieces appear, separate from each other. There are news organizations, however, that have a strong editorial bias that governs not only the topics they write about, but the perspective from which they view the world. There isn't necessarily anything wrong with having an opinion or writing from that viewpoint. However, it isn't the same thing as basic journalistic news reporting. So news organizations like Mother Jones, Slate, Huffington Post, these are all written from a liberal standpoint, while organizations like the Fox Channel, Breitbart, and the Drudge Report fall on the conservative side. You need to be very careful when using information from a news organization with a strong bias. Try instead to find information from a less biased news source, like the Wall Street Journal, USA Today, or Bloomberg News. And then, of course, there are out-and-out fake news websites. Sadly, the clickbait they publish is shared, sometimes millions of times, and believed by a large percentage of the population. We're going to discuss these websites in a later chapter. Suffice it to say that you need to be very careful when you search for information. Stick with reputable sources. Do some digging if you're not sure. There are some websites that will tell you if another website is fake news or not. Finally, you need to determine who is the target audience for this work. While sources like encyclopedias of more general interest or geared to younger or less educated audiences might have some decent background information and be a starting point, they probably won't work for a college-level essay. I would stick to the Gale Virtual Reference Library, which can be found on the CSN library page, for basic background information about your topic. And once again, be very careful about information you find on sites with an obvious agenda or bias. They tend to preach to the choir. In other words, people who visit their sites usually already agree with the conclusions they draw in the articles they publish. And if your tendency is to agree with it as well, it may make it very difficult to distinguish objective fact from opinion. This is not to say you wouldn't find anything worth using, but you would have to check it out very carefully and look at the opposition as well. The textbook lists a few opinion-based journals like Nation, Commentary, and National Review that do have editorial boards and tend to have high editorial standards. Even then, you still need to read those publications with skepticism and look for alternative viewpoints. When looking at the audience, you should also look at how the audience has responded to the work in question. If it's a book, book reviews would be a good place to look. If it's an article, possibly the comments section, although I have to say that those tend to be free-for-all areas in which most of the comments are useless due to trolling and the use of ad hominem fallacies where people call each other names, as well as practically every other fallacy we learned about. You could certainly look through them to see if anyone at all is making any salient points, but it's a hard job. It may be better to look at some of the other works this author has published just to see how well received he or she is on the topic by the intended audience. A writer's reputation can be important. As the textbook says, an author who is often cited by other writers is probably considered an expert in their field. The CRAAP Test. Sounds funny, doesn't it? But it's a very serious document. The CRAAP Test is a handout that will remind you of the questions that you must ask yourself when you evaluate sources. CRAAP, C-R-A-A-P, is an acronym for currency, relevance, authority, accuracy, and purpose. So if it doesn't meet these criteria, well, then it's crap and you shouldn't use it. Let's go over the criteria. Currency. How current is the information? Is it too old or outdated? Are there newer sources with better information? Will an older source work, or do you need the most current information? Relevance. Does this information relate to your topic or answer your question? How important is this information for your needs? Who is the intended audience? Is it too elementary or advanced? Authority. Who is the source of the information, and are they qualified to speak to the topic? What are their credentials? Is there an obvious bias? Accuracy. Is the information reliable, true, and correct? How do you know this? Is the information supported by evidence? Has the document been reviewed? Can you verify the information by looking at other sources? Are there spelling, grammar, or typographical errors? While those are not evidence in and of themselves that the information isn't correct, they do point to a lack of professionalism. Finally, the purpose for the information. Why was it published? Is it to inform, teach, sell, entertain, or persuade? Or is its purpose unclear? Is it fact, opinion, or propaganda? Is it objective and impartial? Is there evidence of bias that leads you to believe the information may not be trustworthy? I've put the link to this handout underneath the video on the Canvas page, so you can print it out and refer to it as you research. Once you've found good sources and evaluated them to make sure they meet your criteria, then you need to know how to use them in your essays. I'm a big fan of avoiding plagiarism, which is blatantly copying or paraphrasing without acknowledging the source of the information. Some information, like well-known facts that a person of average intelligence would generally know, are considered common knowledge and don't need citation. However, when you use things like direct quotes or paraphrases, statistics, facts, surveys, descriptions, examples, or frankly, any ideas that are not your own, you must tell us where and from whom you got the information you're giving us. If you are quoting the source exactly, then you would use quotation marks in your writing. If you decide to paraphrase to make the information clearer or to provide more context, it should be obvious that you're doing so. And no matter what, always cite your sources appropriately for the formatting style you choose, parenthetically or in the text, like these examples. And of course, you have to have a bibliography. That should be references if you're doing it in APA formatting or your works cited page in MLA formatting. This should be a correctly formatted alphabetical list of every source cited in the text of your paper. Don't leave anything out. If you follow these tips, you will be able to find and use the best, most reliable sources in your papers, not just in this class, but in all your other classes as well. This is the end of the lecture to accompany Chapter 12.